The Black Sea is running a ton of clandestine missions we almost never hear about. Covert ambushes at sea, vanishing AIS signals, drones that skim the waves like sharks with SIM cards. And tonight, 2 sanctioned oil tankers didn't just break the silence, they burst into it. We're going to piece together confirmed reporting, official notices, and open-source breadcrumbs to map the shadow war now burning across the Black Sea, and explain why Ukraine just turned Crimea into a death trap Russia can't reliably defend. Here's the headline you can bank on. Late evening, northern Black Sea, off Turkey's coast. 2 tankers tied to Russia's sanctions-dodging shadow fleet suffered near-simultaneous disasters. First, the Gambian-flagged Suezmax Kairos reported a blaze about 28 miles off Kocaeli while transiting empty toward Novorossiysk. Within roughly an hour, the Virat also reported being hit further east, around 35 nautical miles offshore. Turkish authorities coordinated rescues. All 25 crew from Kairos and all 20 on Virat were accounted for. Both ships were in ballast, no crew aboard, which matters for more than one reason. Turkish officials publicly used a careful phrase for the trigger: external impact or external interference. Translation: not a routine engine hiccup. Investigation ongoing. Nobody formally blamed a perpetrator yet. Why these 2? Because they aren't just tankers. They're the plumbing of Moscow's workaround economy. The Shadow Fleet is a patchwork of older hulls with murky ownership, paper-thin insurance, quick-change flags, and a habit of playing hide-and-seek on AIS. They move discounted Urals crude out of Russia, funding the war through legal fog. Multiple outlets and datasets place Kairos and Virat on sanctions lists or in the sanctions crosshairs, Shadow Fleet regulars. So when both catch fire in one night, it's not simply maritime misfortune, it's a strategic message sprayed in gasoline. Let's zoom in to the first scene. Kairos, 274 by 48 meters, Suezmax, Gambian flag, empty, route set toward Novorossiysk. Fire and heavy smoke reported. Turkey's Directorate General of Maritime Affairs marked the position at roughly 28 miles off Kocaeli and explicitly cited external impact. That's the key phrase. It points away from an onboard maintenance error and toward the war's expanding toolset, drifting mines or uncrewed surface vessels. The point isn't what kind of hit. The point is that somebody reached out and touched a sanctioned tanker in one of the most surveilled corners of the Black Sea. Second scene, Virat. Same evening, further east. A blast, a fire, heavy smoke in the engine room, 20 crew, all okay. Turkish responders again. Reuters' early lines and subsequent wire copies stay cautious about attribution, but consistent on the facts. 2 incidents, same night, both ships empty, rescue ops underway. We don't need conspiracy theories to see the pattern. The timeline speaks for itself. Now, the quiet confession embedded in the open sources. Local port agents whispered, "mine," while OSINT circles floated USVs as a competing theory. Neither has been officially confirmed, but these are not wild guesses. They fit the known plays. Naval mines, old and new, have drifted and lurked in the Black Sea since 2022, and Ukraine's sea drones have already rewritten the rulebook from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. If you can punch a warship at birth, a sanctioned Suezmax underway is hardly off limits. This is how pressure stays deniable. No pilot to capture, no radio to intercept. Just a burn pattern on steel and a silent wake on thermal. If you want the breadcrumb map, it's in the material we pulled. The tanker's plotted path parallels Turkey's coast, a corridor dense enough for rescues, but still vulnerable to a carefully set hazard. The route graphic is right there, page 5, and the article lists the exact specs, operators, and the sanctions context in black and white. It even notes the Kairos may have hit a mine, and that OSINT analysts consider a drone strike plausible. Precision like that is why we're leaning on multiple sources before we say anything definitive. Okay, context. The Black Sea since 2022 has been a chessboard played with cheap sensors and expensive consequences. The Montreux Convention keeps extra-regional navies at arm's length, So this isn't a carrier brawl. It's a knife fight between mines, missiles, and robots. Russia tried to dominate from Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. Ukraine changed the geometry. In late 2022, and again in 2023, naval drones slammed into Sevastopol and forced Russia to harden its ports. In 2024, even Russian-installed officials admitted fleet movements had shifted. In 2025, Novorossiysk keeps getting harassed by drones. Loadings and port ops have been disrupted more than once. You don't need to sink every ship to bend a coastline. You just need to make every departure feel like Russian roulette. If you're still watching, by the way, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. The detailed, patient ones who don't just want explosions, you want consequences. So, consider subscribing now so you don't miss the next breakdown. Let's get back to how this changes the game. And Crimea? The peninsula's logistics rest on three arteries: Kerch, the landlines through occupied southern Ukraine, and the maritime lifeline via Sevastopol, Novorossiysk. Ukraine has spent 2 years methodically turning all three into problems. Multiple strikes and closures have forced Russia into awkward workarounds: ferries, night sailings, and dispersal. Ukrainian and Russian statements alike have acknowledged how sea drones turned glamorous infrastructure into a liability and pushed the Black Sea Fleet into a defensive crouch. That's not bravado, it's a cumulative fact pattern. Back to the tankers. Hitting empty hulls telegraphs a careful escalation ladder. Loaded tankers risk environmental catastrophe and international backlash. Ballast-only hits keep the signal high and the blowback lower. It also lets Ankara frame the response as a safety operation, not a NATO-Russia showdown. Turkey's public lines stayed clinical. 2 incidents, external impact, rescues launched. That's how you wage a shadow war without forcing the gatekeeper of the Bosporus to pick a public fight. Let's talk economics, because spreadsheets can punch harder than missiles. Every mystery adds cost. Hazard pay for crews, fatter premiums for insurers, standby tugs, coastal detours, and the little matter of flags and shell companies scrambling to stay ahead of sanction updates. Remember, the Shadow Fleet runs on opacity. Opacity just got expensive. Trade press and wire services agree. Both Kairos and Virat are on sanction lists. That means every day they're off the rotation is a day the Kremlin's oil revenue shrinks at the margins. And margins are where wars either grind on or quietly starve. Operationally, what could have done it? Mines are cheap, patient, and cruel. You can herd traffic into swept lanes, plant devices in the margins, then let currents and complacency do the rest. USVs are agile, camera-friendly, and psychologically devastating. A small boat can't carry a battleship killer warhead, but it can mission kill a tanker with a focused strike. Fire on the deck, a gash near the waterline, a propulsion casualty, weeks of downtime. If you've watched this channel, you've seen the drone arc already. First shock, then normalization, then fear as the target realizes there's no safe hour on the clock. In the Black Sea, that arc started 2 years ago. Tonight, it reached the world of commercial shipping. Let's ground this in the hard details again, because accuracy is the spine of drama. Kairos, Gambian flag, managed by an outfit listed out of Shanghai. Suezmax dimensions, empty, fire roughly 28 miles off Kocaeli. Crew evacuated. Risk of sinking flagged by Türkiye at one point. Virat, damaged in the western Black Sea. Empty, crew safe. Smoke reported. Rescue units dispatched. Both are sanctioned as part of Moscow's workaround fleet. All of that is cross-checked across AP/Reuters and corroborated in the uploaded reporting with Bloomberg imagery to boot. That's the constellation of facts our story orbits. Now the strategic punchline. Every time a sanctioned carrier burns, Russia has to pay twice. First, in money, insurance, delays, reroutes, and the opportunity cost of a long-haul tanker sitting in port, scorched. Second, in psychology, mariners talk, port captains talk, insurers talk. External impact is a phrase that haunts a WhatsApp group harder than a storm forecast. If you're trying to move oil from the Black Sea with quietly reflagged hulls, you don't want the Turkish Coast Guard tweeting about you. What about Novorossiysk? 3 days before the tanker fires, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium briefly suspended loadings after a mass drone assault, then resumed operations. but with caveats about missed monthly targets thanks to repeated disruptions. Add recurring Ukrainian drone attacks that have struck the wider area. If you're mapping risk, the dots are starting to connect themselves. Russia's Black Sea logistics aren't just stressed, they're becoming unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one thing a wartime supply chain cannot absorb. Which brings us to Crimea's awful math. You can defend a peninsula with layered air defenses, aggressive patrols, and hard-skinned ports. Or you can try to defend every bridge span, every rail junction, every pier, every tanker, every tug, every hour. You cannot do both forever. When even Russian officials admit ships had to move away from Sevastopol after repeated attacks, you know the geometry flipped. Ukraine didn't need to sink the Black Sea fleet. It just needed to make the fleet behave like prey. So, who did it? The honest answer right now, nobody has claimed responsibility. Türkiye said external interference. Wire services repeated the phrasing. Maritime outlets highlighted the shadow fleet angle and the synchrony of the incidents. OSINT analysts are split between mines and USVs. That's where we are, factually. If you're here for someone to yell a confession into a microphone, you're in the wrong battle space. In the Black Sea, silence is a weapon system. Let's talk second-order effects, because this is where Crimea as a death trap stops being a tagline and becomes a budget line. Insurers revise war risk premiums. Crews ask for hazard pay or walk. Neutral ports increase inspections on reflagged tankers. The Bosporus gatekeeper watches more closely. Even the perception of maritime mines or sea drones in busy corridors reshapes sailing windows and convoy behavior. Then the accountant's nightmare. A sanctioned tanker waiting for a tug that can't sail until the next safe window because an unmanned boat keeps photobombing Telegram. At some point, the spreadsheet holds up a sign that says, "Stop." Russia has counters, of course. More patrol craft, more helicopter pickets, more counter USV booms at port entrances, more minesweeping, more decoys, more electronic warfare. But every ruble spent on defensive posture is a ruble not spent elsewhere, and every extra escort slows the tempo of commerce. Meanwhile, Ukrainian doctrine keeps doing what it does. Attack the arteries, force dispersion, multiply the number of things Russia must defend. If that logic sounds like a slow-motion choke, that's because it is. There's also the information battle. External impact is careful phrasing, but it's still devastating PR for any ship owner already sweating sanctions paperwork. Trade media and major outlets have now put Shadow Fleet and Black Sea in the same headline as fire and rescue operation. That branding is poison for grey zone logistics, and it is contagious. If a pier operator's hull just lit the horizon orange, the thought, "Am I next?" arrives well before any tug. Now the stakes. The Kerch Strait and the bridge complex have already endured closures and strikes. By late 2023, even Ukrainian officials bragged that the attacks forced Russian logisticians into ferries and nighttime runs. Reuters documented how sea drones overturned naval operations. When you stack those disruptions next to Novorossiysk suspensions and tonight's twin tanker fires, the pattern stops being an abstract OSINT collage and becomes a coherent campaign. Make Crimea's supply lines unreliable and keep them that way. What about escalation risk? Hitting empties signals someone is calibrating. It preserves safety for crews and the environment, limits diplomatic fallout, and keeps Türkiye in a cooperative stance. It also sends a whisper to ship owners. We can reach you. If the pattern holds, you'll see more defenses around priority hulls, tight convoy windows, and sudden technical delays in the schedules of ships with suspicious paperwork. And you'll see more mysteries. That word will keep popping up in maritime notices, because it's the lingua franca of a war where attribution is the most valuable currency. Let's finish with implications for the peninsula that gave this episode its title. Ukraine just turned Crimea into a death trap, and Russia can't defend it the way it used to. Not because Moscow lacks guns, but because it lacks certainty. You can ring Sevastopol with SAMS. You can move your fleet east. You can escort tankers and harden jetties. But you cannot be everywhere all the time. against cheap, deniable instruments that only need to be right once to ruin your night. The cost curve is brutal, and over time, it is one-directional. We're not speculating here, we're reading the public record. 2 sanctioned tankers, Kairos and Virat, caught fire after external impacts off Turkey's coast. Crews rescued, both ships empty. Turkish authorities led the response. No official attribution, but mines or sea drones are credible and widely discussed possibilities. The context is a Black Sea, where Ukraine's uncrewed systems and standoff strikes have forced Russia to reroute warships, harden ports, and live with surprise. Add Novorossiysk disruptions, and the fact that these ships belong to the same shadow economy that keeps the Kremlin's oil money moving. You get a battlespace where commercial logistics are now legitimate targets. Morally grey, legally complicated, strategically devastating. Night on the Black Sea. A tanker sits blackened, tow lines taut. The deck crew watching sparks float into the dark like fireflies. Somewhere in Crimea, a commander looks at a map pocked with new red circles and old orange warnings. Somewhere in Istanbul, an official drafts another calm maritime bulletin that sounds like a weather report but reads like a war log. Somewhere in Kiev, a planner draws a thicker line along the coast and writes one word in the margin: repeat. Because that's the point. Not the single strike, but the repetition. Not the spectacle of a burning ship, but the habit of ships burning often enough that investors blanch, crews balk, and the Kremlin spreadsheets start bleeding. That's what a death trap looks like at sea. It's not a door slamming shut in one motion. It's 1,000 small catches clicking into place until your freedom of movement is an illusion and every exit is a risk. And if you're wondering whether this is sustainable, remember the asymmetry at work. Sea drones and smart mines cost peanuts compared to the assets they neutralize. A tanker off charter for 6 weeks isn't just lost revenue, it's a hole in a war chest. Russia can patch it with bravado. It can announce new escorts, shuffle hulls, yell at insurers, but it can't order the Black Sea to be safe again. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not while the quiet weapons of a quiet campaign keep writing the same 3 words across the horizon. External impact reported. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When the routes that feed Crimea become unreliable by design, when bridges close, ports harden, fleets scatter, and even the shadow fleet starts to fear the shadows, how long does a peninsula stay a prize before it becomes a bill? When the math stops working, pride meets reality. And in the Black Sea tonight, reality is dressed like a tug crew under an orange sky, hauling yet another mystery back toward shore.